Hello, and welcome to the first ever episode of The Marketing Architects, a research-first podcast dedicated to answering your toughest marketing questions. I'm Elena Hengel. I run the marketing team here at MA, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Angela Voss, our CEO, and Rob DeMars, our Chief Creative Officer.
Hi,
Hello.
Elena. Pretty exciting. First ever podcast.
Yeah. So we created this show because we've had a really hard time finding information on marketing and advertising best practices that's actually rooted in data and research, not just based on trends, fads, or personal opinions. So we'll be here each week to answer any and all of your marketing questions, always aiming to construct our answers using data and what truly drives business results. But before we jump into our main topic, I'd like to intro my co-hosts a little bit more. So Ange, would you mind telling us just a bit more about your background?
Totally. Yeah, happy to. So I, coming out of college, actually started in digital marketing, majored in mass communications, went into digital marketing right after college, and worked there for about 4 years in that space. And then I joined Marketing Architects in 2007. At that time, we were radio only as an agency, and shortly thereafter, we launched our television platform, and I moved over to the TV team. I do love TV, but I'm actually more fascinated with kind of the science that you speak to a little bit of what we do. I love understanding consumer behavior. I love optimization. I love data. So happy to have landed here because it's just a perfect fit for what makes my brain light up.
Awesome. And Rob, you're also a TV fan, and you've been destined to work in advertising your whole life, right?
Well, I was destined to be a magician at Chuck E. Cheese, but that didn't work out. So I did Plan B advertising out of college, worked at a big agency here in Minneapolis, doing everything from cellular to serial, and joined Marketing Architects in 2004, if you can believe it. It's a long time to be in one shop. This place has been great. We have just, we continue to evolve as an agency. I always say we've been like 8 different agencies all in one. So it's been awesome. We've got a great team here, writers, art directors, producers, engineers, and I would say I'm definitely a nerd. I mean, they would all call me a pretty big nerd as a creative, but I'm pretty intimidated by the two of you. So I do have chat GPT standing by to answer your questions for me, Elena. So let's do this.
Great. Well, and I suppose, Rob, marketing's sort of like magic, hopefully. So you ended up magic adjacent.
Right.
Maybe.
Absolutely. A lot of tomfoolery for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Well, today I wanted to start our first episode with a topic that I see frequently debated in the marketing world, and that is, what are the dangers of over-relying on digital marketing? But before we answer that, let's start with a story that went viral within the marketing community a few months ago. Ange, what can you tell us about what Airbnb did, how they changed, how they were investing in advertising?
Yeah, I think Airbnb is just one of them too. I feel like there's been a couple of them lately. I think the latest one I saw was maybe Under Armour, but so towards the end of 2022, Airbnb obviously is public. They were releasing their most recent quarterly financials, their results. And at that time, we're speaking to their most profitable quarter to date. So back in 2019, I think, they began to try to depend less on their search advertising. And we're really aiming to lean more into their broad marketing strategy, broad campaigns in order to build their brand with their core, target through, I think, both a mix of PR and television. And it seems to be working for them. I looked into their public financials, and you can clearly see a shift. You can see in 2018, 2019-ish, they're investing maybe 30 to 35% of their revenue into marketing. Now it's closer to 15 to 20, and the revenue's growing. So definitely a good spot to be. And I think the added feather in their cap at this point, just with the market that we're faced with and economic uncertainty as it is, they now feel they've got marketing spend at a low enough percentage of revenue that they wouldn't have to drastically reduce spending should economic headwinds kind of worsen their position. And so it's been kind of a fun story to follow, them thinking of performance marketing more as a way to kind of laser in to balance supply and demand rather than just a way to purchase a large amount of customers is kind of what their CEO has said. So it's a good model to follow, I think, inspiring for a lot of brands.
Yeah, and I think one of my favorite parts of it is that the person on the earnings call that talked about marketing was the CFO. He was the one who got up and said, this is working for us, which is kind of, as marketers, that's sort of best case scenario to have the CFO singing.
You get the CFO on your side. That's a great thing for sure.
Why do the CMOs get bad raps? Like it's
right. They're the chief money officer, right? I mean, come on. So do you think that's unique though to Airbnb? Like it's definitely, the most I know about an Airbnb is staying in one, but when it comes to kind of the overall brand, it's definitely a famous one. And, are they kind of unique in their ability to do that? Or do you think this is something that, depending upon where someone is on their kind of growth trajectory, that this would work for them as well?
Well, I mean, they have been around for a while, since the 2000s. So they have built a brand. And I think what they're realizing is that they kind of missed what they had built with their brand, right? And we're thinking that they needed to rely on that performance marketing. And I think that happens a lot with brands these days, especially digitally native brands. So I think it's common for you starting your business, regardless of your method of marketing, you are building a brand, whether you realize it or not. And of course, some channels do that better than others, but it's happening even with just us brands. So I think it's common. It's like pay to play position, right? And trying to kind of steal share from the VRBOs or the booking.coms of the world. And I think with the marketing universe being kind of addicted to data, you become addicted to performance marketing, addicted to this demand capture. And brands can end up paying for traffic that kind of they would have already otherwise had. And I think that's what happened with Airbnb. But I think that each brand will reach a tipping point, right, at different stages based on kind of how penetrated they are in their category and what their early marketing days look like.
Right. Well, Ange, you're doing a good job of kind of moving into our main question today. And the reason why we chose Airbnb as a story we wanted to tell is they're an example of a brand that came out and said, hey, we were over-reliant on digital. We were over-invested in search. They shifted their strategy, and they've been reaping the rewards of that. And that brings us into this main question. And I'd like to start with a little bit of a hot take. We believe that an over-reliance on digital marketing is not only a bad strategic choice, we'd go so far as to say it's actually dangerous. And I will come armed with some data and examples to back this up. We could look at Facebook ad prices have tripled in recent years. Google's made price hikes. There's more competition online. Audience attention is fragmented. There's new platforms like TikTok taking off, but then at the same time, there's uncertainty about the future of those platforms. Ad fraud is a massive problem that I don't think is talked about enough. The total cost of ad fraud is predicted to be $100 billion this year. And then that's not
a small
even
number.
No, it's terrible. And third-party cookies are going away, and we haven't even dipped into Apple and the privacy changes there.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I love me some Apple. I love Apple on all kinds of fronts, but man, they really dropped the mic on direct marketers when they released iOS 14. I think that was in 2021. And basically that made it so that consumers could opt out of being followed. And overnight, that just crushed D2C. I mean, it was like billions of dollars lost. I heard something like Facebook's algorithm or their attribution platform became like 50% off. Like, well, why even have it then, right? If you're 50% wrong all the time. So now you're basically spending more money to get worse performance.
Totally. I think it's maybe not entirely crippled all of D2C, but it was very impactful. You know, you hear brands like Warby Parker and Stitch Fix and Allbirds, like these massive examples, massive brands that really kind of pioneered a new way of retail, right? By selling directly to consumers online. And now they're facing these significant challenges for a variety of reasons. Obviously, everyone was impacted by COVID and the supply chain and everything. But one of the big ones is, you know, those privacy changes have impacted their ability to measure the effectiveness of their social media campaigns, among other. And I think that becomes kind of a double whammy, because you have all these brands struggling to make platforms like Facebook work. So then they pull back, and then Facebook's in pain. So they raise pricing, which is further evidence of just needing diversification in your marketing strategy, regardless of what the channel is. Like, we just want diversity. Yeah.
Right. And especially in what's predicted to be another tough year for brands, it's probably wise to not have all your eggs in one basket, because as we've seen, something like Apple, they can, you know, they made this change, and overnight it turns out most consumers don't want to be tracked. And I mean, I was surprised by the implications that had for advertising too. And Angela, I wanted to ask you too, you've worked with marketing leaders for over a decade. You led the account team at our agency. So you've seen marketers that have succeeded and grown consistently. I think there's a lot of examples of brands, like you were talking about with these D2C brands, that they've had these rises and falls, and you've seen brands, you know, consistently succeed. How are they thinking about these investments in digital?
Yeah. Well, this is going to probably sound like a pitch for television. I don't intend it that way, actually. But I think a lot of brands that we work with are trying to reduce investment in digital. They're trying to diversify, right, when they first start to work with us in television. But I really think that the right mindset is to think less about digital versus TV and think more about harvesting existing demand versus building future demand pools. Going back to, you know, using Airbnb as an example, unless we give consumers a chunk of change and a week off, we're probably not going to convince them to book a vacation unless they're kind of already planning on it, right? So what marketers are trying to get away from is this bloodbath, or I should say what they should be trying to get away from is this bloodbath that occurs at the point of sale. A consumer is actively looking for a home to rent, and the bloodbath is competing at that moment for the sale, which is very often, of course, like paid search marketing. And so the question to be asking ourselves is, how do you compete long before that? You know, a very small percentage of your total target audience is shopping for your product or service at any given time. And so the big game is really winning that future demand and investing in top of funnel channels so that when I am like, yeah, I do need a vacation, you know, I go straight to Airbnb versus hopping on to booking.com or, you know, searching anything out on the internet. I have that mental availability with my consumer that takes me right to them.
Right. So you're saying that successful brands, they're thinking about, how do I build this future demand for my brand, and how are consumers thinking about me, so that there's a moment when they need a service and I'm front of mind. Well, I know you said we're trying not to, you know, promise not every episode is going to be all about how great TV is, but I do think that when we're talking about this balance of digital, and there is a point to be made about traditional channels, and traditional channels, I do think the data shows that they are better at building these long-term brand memories, trust, you know, consumers trust offline channels generally more than online channels, which makes some sense, especially we're talking about the privacy changes and all of that, I think relates. So I do think we lean towards traditional offline channels like TV.
Well, TV is strongest at signaling. I mean, the research shows that as well. Social media is actually the worst at establishing trust as a brand, and TV is. I mean, actually, you just look at Google, Meta, and Amazon; they're all on TV for a reason, right?
I think TV gets a bad rap a bit about just being a brand building channel. You know, that's kind of, I think, how traditional media is thought of in general, is brand building. And those traditional channels do work to drive immediate sales. Spend on offline grew last year, grew even more for D2C brands by like 10%. But you really do need a balance of both. So if you're thinking about TV or any traditional channel really in its ability to capture kind of that in-market demand that we talked about, just like digital does. And we typically see that TV's immediate performance can be on par or even better than activation channels like social, et cetera. I think we do that really well for our clients, just prove out to them that TV can drive more than just brand awareness. But there's language that was introduced, and I can't remember where I saw it, but I think TV is often thought of as the long game strategy, and I might have even said that before a little earlier, but that sort of implies that you're going to need to invest and then wait for this payback, and that's uncomfortable for marketers. It's uncomfortable for CMOs to go to CFOs and ask for money, not knowing for sure if and when it's going to return. But I think when done well, we should be thinking of TV as more of kind of a sustained game versus a long game. You do get those immediate results. Your agency should be able to point to, we did X and Y happened, capturing that in-market demand and stealing share from your competitors, but then also building future demand pool for your business.
Right. And that brings me to what I think is one of the last pieces of this puzzle, which is this perception that traditional marketing channels, offline marketing channels, anything other than digital means you're basically just burning your money.
Right.
And I think I've talked a little bit about the value of traditional channels, and I've posted about that on LinkedIn, and it's always like I'm fighting for my life in the comments because people get really upset and they think you're saying that you don't care about measurement or you're just burning dollars. And you're saying that, traditional channels, they don't necessarily have to be all short term. And we're also not saying that digital's not valuable. We're a TV agency, but you need digital. There's a reason why brands spent, nearly $250 billion on digital last year. It works. So we're not saying this has to be, never invest in digital. I mean, that's just silly, right?
Well, I'm saying that, but you guys aren't.
We need everything in moderation. Rob needs everything in moderation. He's a bit of an extremist, but everything in moderation, right? Like it's embracing this mindset of bothism, which is not my term. That's Mark Ritzen's term, but
I love that term.
Bothism, yeah. It's the idea that we should be embracing both digital and traditional marketing. They are complements to each other in their strategies instead of prioritizing one over the other. And
it's very Zen.
Totally. But you should be assessing, right, the best approach for each individual campaign and also where you're at in your journey. If you're able to tease out the fact that you do have a lot of word of mouth going on, you do have a lot of traffic coming to your site, you're not exactly sure where it's coming from. Like those are good things to be seeing happen. And that's a signal, your branded search increasing, your share of search increasing. That's a signal that your brand has power and people are coming to you when they're in that buying moment or starting to consider that they do need a vacation. But not everyone's going to be there. You haven't caught everyone. And so we shouldn't be bailing, or avoiding the opportunity to introduce someone to our brand when they are shopping, but solely relying on that does feel like a very short-term gain.
Right. I also, Rob, I love the word bothism. And I think it also, speaks to what Angela's saying, that it's going to be both and it's going to differ according to your brand. But if anyone's telling you, you don't need, don't do anything with digital, or if anyone's saying don't do anything with offline channels, you probably should question where they're coming from, because it's really, there's no right really answer here.
Totally. Yeah. I think that think of it as like each marketing channel, like what's its superpower? Like we get to work in television, which is awesome. It feels like we get to live on the sea because we're the channel that lifts all boats. And you can really kind of think of TV's impact in 3 buckets. It should drive immediate sales. And of course, if you're an e-commerce brand, that's easier to see than if you're solely in retail or something like that. It can and should be building those future demand pools for your brand so that you're not needing to compete at the point of sale for every purchase. But really in between there, don't miss TV's macro effects. TV is a legitimizer and therefore really improves the effectiveness of all of your marketing channels. You should be able to see it in digital, in your direct mail. So don't forget to look for those impacts as well. Seeing that lift can be a little trickier in terms of measurement, and being able to tease those out really calls for controlled environments. But I think there are a lot of brands that test TV and miss on that full measurement, and they end up walking away without fully understanding what TV did for them, which is a bummer.
Right. Just because it's not easy to measure doesn't mean it's not working for your business.
Yeah, it reminds me. I once heard Rory Sutherland, although he says it with a much better accent. He says, "There's nothing harder than direct marketing a brand no one has heard of."
Love that. That's Absolutely. An even better place to end, Rob. Thank you. That's it for this episode of The Marketing Architects. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, and if you find our show valuable, please leave us a rating and review. If you've got a question you'd like us to answer, you can contact us at marketingarchitects.com/podcast. Now go forth and build great marketing.